Sales are up. Reviews are the best in years, but despite trying to avoid controversy with a cleverly worded PR message about monetization pre-launch, inevitably this year's Call of Duty Modern Warfare could not avoid said controversy. But this time, it's political. People are up in arms that the game apparently rewrites a real-life history to make Russia the bad guys and America not the bad guys. My name's Mr. Gareth Evans, and here to discuss it with me is Mr. Henry Cooper.
What more do you need than an Englishman and a Welshman talking about Americans being mean to Russians?
Let's do it then. So, first up, sales. Apparently they're pretty good.
Yeah, game's done pretty well. So, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019, just to make that clear, sold 39% more just physical copies than Black Ops 4, which was last year's Call of Duty entry. Now, we don't know anything about digital, but it's widely reported that physical sales have been declining for years and years now. But the fact that physical on its own is 39% more than the last release from Activision for Call of Duty, that's telling in itself, and we don't even know how many people bought it digitally.
Yeah, this year we've seen a trend of games selling less than previous years, previous installments. It's just how it's going these days. Box sales are going down. All the games are suffering that. Apart from, as it seems, Call of Duty, which has seen a bump 49%. So it's huge. It's a huge result for Call of Duty. It's number one in the charts in the UK here, so it's done really well, and we can't only assume that the digital figures are a lot better too.
And 62% of those box copies were on PS4, leaving just 38 for the Xbox. And that's probably due to the survival mode exclusivity, which was another one of these numerous controversies that was around the game. And if you don't know, it's a exclusive mode just for PS4 and the Sony system, because they paid for it for a whole year, and naturally, and quite rightly so, PC players and Xbox players are not happy about that one bit. But that hasn't really stopped the reviews coming in pretty damn well. Currently on Metacritic, the game sits at 86 on PS4, and on OpenCritic it is 83, with 100% of critics recommending the game. It is the highest reviewed Call of Duty in about 8 years, since 2011's Modern Warfare 3, and that's largely when a lot of people thought of the game at its highest, and then after that people sort of started to fall off. Only about 20 reviews are out at the moment, and many more are still to come. Even big outlets like IGN, theirs is still a work in progress, because these live service games aren't right at launch, so you've got to think about it after the fact.
Yeah, IGN cut their review into like 3 parts, and then they do an overview. So they've reviewed the campaign so far, and then there's also the co-op mode and the multiplayer mode, and then the overall thing, because there's a lot to cover in this, so they want to take the time about it.
I think that is a good way to do it these days. So on Metacritic, the lowest score is still 80, which is still pretty damn good, and the highest is a 92. It's been praised for a lot of different things, like varied multiplayer modes, both large and small scale, so you can have big battles with lots and lots of people, or smaller, tighter 2v2 matches. Amazing visuals and sound design, which is kind of expected from a game of this budget, but it's always great to see that. And it's got particular praise for its campaign, which is roughly about 6 hours long, and Game Informer, who rated it 8.8, said it's the best in the series since COD 4, so they're speaking pretty highly of it. Now, there has been some criticism for it being too edgy and kind of shocking for the sake of shock, rather than actually telling a compelling narrative, but all in all it's been pretty positive in regards to the campaign, and the developers touted it as having like grey moral choices for the characters, and they're going to be doing uncomfortable things. But as it turns out, it looks like things are actually pretty black and white, and the bad guys are still bad. And there are numerous comments on the Metacritic from users who are all echoing the same sort of sentiment. So here's just one as an example from rated_R. Players: developers promised a game with grey morality. There will be no good and bad. Developers: goddamn bad Russians. And that's just one of 1,919 negative reviews from users at the time of recording.
Yeah, 3.1 user score on Metacritic, which is a huge disparity from the 86 score of the critics on Metacritic. And that a lot of those comments, like Henry said, are due to this controversy surrounding a real life event that happened, and they've rewritten it in the game. So let's just go through this. It surrounds an incident on the Highway of Death, which was a road used during the Gulf War in 1991. There was an American attack, or a war crime as some people will call it, controversial attack, in which 350 retreating or surrendering Iraqi soldiers were killed. Some people even reporting that women and children were among the victims. The perpetrators of that attack in real life was the US and French forces, but apparently this game rewrites that incident and blames it on Russia. Of course it does.
It's Russia doing the bad thing to our heroic Westerners, because we're here to save the day. A key point to note is that it's not actually Russia which this takes place in. It's Uzbekistan, which is definitely not Russia.
Not Russia.
That's not where it happened.
A made-up, fictitious country. This is a screenshot posted to Twitter of one of the characters in the game explaining the rewritten story, and it clearly says, blames the whole thing on Russia, which has been a point of outrage. I mean, a lot of people outraged on social media because of it. Of course they are. With a couple of Reddit posts that I've found, r/games got 3.8 thousand upvotes in 13 hours, and in the PC Gaming subreddit, the post has 2.6 thousand upvotes in the last 6 hours. But that's the problem, right? When you're making a game in the real world, all right, they've made up this fictitious country in order for the incident to take place, but they've used Russia as the bad guy, right? And some games get around it by making up countries, making up bad guys, doing it versus zombies or whatever, right? But they've made Russia the bad guy here. They've called it the Highway of Death, which is the same name, and they've blamed it on the Russians. How did they think they were going to get away with this?
Yeah, it's just too close to real events, and changing the country is just a half measure. You can use real world events as inspiration, because there's numerous examples of that where bad things happen in the real world and they've been translated in a certain way but changing it in a different way in video games. But you have to tell a new story with a new context, and the event itself has to be at least a different name. Having Russia be the bad guys, don't even have that. Just have a radical terrorist group in Russia who Russia themselves condemn. They're not like part of it. We don't like them, and it's just this rogue cell doing it by themselves. But no, that's not what's happening.
Yeah, and don't call it the Highway of Death. Just call it a different thing. Don't equate it to real world events. And it'd be fine if they made themselves the bad guys, but a lot of people calling this American propaganda, because you can imagine if some other country did this and rewrote history in order to make Americans the perpetrators of a war crime, they'd be outraged. They would be outraged, and Americans, and rightfully so, would be upset by this.
It just feels like the classic white savior or Western savior narrative that you've seen in Hollywood time and time again, of the civilized white man goes over to the indigenous tribe and he saves them and makes them better than they were before. And it's dated at its most basic. If you don't want to get away from any kind of controversy like that, it's dated and boring, but it's also incredibly offensive to people who are parts of these nations that are affected.
I tend not to weep over that. I'm Russian. Or I was.
Yeah, a lot of people saying this is a game, this is a fictitious event, and it's not representative of the real world. It's all fiction. This is just a game. I get that argument, but just don't call it the Highway of Death. Why'd you call it the Highway of Death? It's that simple. You've made a mistake there.
And there's even a Russian streamer who's completely quit the game and given up on it because of the controversy, and he's not exactly a small player. He's got 365,000 followers on Twitch. That's the user We Love Games, and he's pretty big in Russia. So if he's shaming the game, his viewers, who more than likely are also Russian, are going to know about it, and they're going to get pissed off too.
Yeah,
quite rightly so, to be honest.
Yeah, and this whole thing around the game actually not being released in Russia on the PSN was announced a while ago, right?
Yeah, this was last week, and you still buy the game for PlayStation in Russia, that's not a problem, but PSN, as in their online store, you cannot buy it if you're in Russian territory, and it's Sony themselves who wouldn't allow this. It's not really anything to do with Activision, the publisher. It was Sony who made the call, and according to Call of Duty's Russian Twitter account, they said, "At the heart of Modern Warfare is a fully fictional story carefully crafted to please all players. Sony Interactive Entertainment decided not to sell the game in the Russian PS store. We look forward to the release of the game in digital form for PC and Xbox on October the 25th. And they really stress fully fictional. So I guess at the time, with hindsight, you can see why that lines up and why that is the case.
Yeah, there's been no explanation as to why they're not releasing it in Russia on the... I mean, you can only try and assume that they're trying to avoid controversy here, obviously. Or they're just not happy. SIE Russia are just not happy with the depiction of the country in the game. And this echoes the No Russian mission back in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, which was a mission where you play as an undercover American operative and you take part in a massacre of civilians at an airport. That mission was actually removed from the Russian release of the game, which was notable, right? It's kind of like them not allowing the whole, this time around where they're not allowing the whole game to go out. Maybe that's what they're doing. Maybe they're doctoring the game in order to please the Russian, to make it not look like American propaganda to the Russians, because from where we're sitting, at the very least, it looks like it's a very pro-American, very anti-Russian message in the game.
And it doesn't seem like this is Russian censorship. It's not the Russian bodies saying, no, you can't do this. It's the American bodies saying, oh no, we shouldn't do this, otherwise it's going to piss them off and they won't buy it.
Actually, going back to the No Russian mission, Activision said at the time, and this was back 2011, 2009, a lot of years ago.
It's been 84 years.
They said, other countries have formal ratings board that we regularly work with. However, Russia does not have a formal ratings entity. As a result, we choose to block the scenes after seeking the advice of counsel. They blamed it on the lack of ratings board. They said it was too gory for the Russian public to play. Nothing to do with the fact that they were depicting Russians just slaughtering innocents in an airport. They probably wouldn't get away with that kind of excuse these days with the likes of us on YouTube analysing that bullshit. But that was their bullshit story back at the time. It's notable that they haven't come out and explained why the game isn't available on the PSN store in Russia, because maybe they haven't got a leg to stand on.
Although this isn't exactly the first controversy the game's been dealing with, right? Because there have been all sorts that have been ongoing, and it clearly hasn't impacted the sales, because we discussed recently the Battle Pass system, which is definitely instead of loot boxes, and they're definitely never coming. It's going to be perfectly fine. There's no loot boxes. It's going to be great. Although it literally doesn't say that they won't ever be coming, and we know Activision have done that sort of thing before. And then there's the whole argument about whether or not things are pay to win, because you can earn it in game, but you can also potentially pay for it with real money to get there faster. But some people still don't think that's pay to. It's the same arguments we've had over and over again, and we've done a whole video on it, so you should go and check that one out too if you're interested.
I mean, that was following that very PR heavy pre-launch blog post that they announced all this shit. The whole point of that was them trying to avoid controversy at launch. Now, I'm not sure any cleverly worded PR post will get them out of this mess, which is I don't know. I mean, how can you defend it? Obviously, we're going to piss off a lot of Americans here who feel that there's no problem with it. Yes, it's a fictitious world and shit like that. We're only saying it as we see it. We might be wrong, but it does seem like, I mean, if it was us, if it was me, and people were depicting Wales as committed atrocities on the English back in the day, whereas I know for a fact it was the other way around, I'd be slightly pissed off.
Yeah, that makes sense. And England has done a lot of bad shit in the past.
To everybody.
Yeah.
We haven't got
You don't get an empire without.
We're not saying we haven't committed atrocities as our cultures. I'm sure the Welsh did some bad things too, probably.
To sheep.
Come on now, guys. You're lowering the.
So before we take it any lower, we should probably wrap things up. And those are just our thoughts. Make sure you let us know down below. Do you think this is a political stunt? Maybe they did it deliberately to get people talking about it, or do you think this is just naive and short-sighted and just Americans rewriting history for their own benefit? Make sure you leave a like, hit that subscribe button and the bell. Go on over to patreon.com/prettygoodgaming to support the content we've been creating and bringing to you every day. My name's been Henry. This has been Gaz. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.